Charles Prescott stood in the exquisitely designed sitting room of his mother's house. It was another Monday morning, which meant that he was to be at his house, but his mother wasn't hearing anything of it after they had dinner the last night. He took another look at himself in the mirror. His chiseled face seemed chiseled from the same stone as the gigantic houses that surrounded him. "Charles, darling, you should wear the navy blue suit for the meeting today. It makes you look more matured, rather than this." His mother strode into his room with a cup of coffee in her hands. Charles closed his eyes, turning his face skywards. "Mum, I feel like—" "Don't forget to tie your tie properly. I can't have you looking like some sort of bohemian." His eyes rolled in exasperation as he adjusted his tie for what felt like the 100th time that morning. Noticing that his mother's eyes were still on him, he made his way over to the room on his right, where his suits were arranged. Picking one of the suits from the hanger, he quickly put it on. He didn't want to be late. As he strode out of the room, she was waiting by his bedroom door. "Don't forget the speech I prepared for you. Once you tell them all that, you have won them over. I'd be there before the meeting." "But Mum, isn't it supposed to be something that I should write? If I tell them how I really feel about taking the company forward, they would be glad to be part of it." Victoria Prescott sipped her coffee slowly and her face crumpled immediately. It was already turning cold, just like her smile. "What have I told you about these things? Just trust me, Charles. Do as I say." She put her free hand on his shoulder. Charles knew what exactly she was saying. She wanted him to again do her bidding and her will, just like every other time. Her words low-key sounded like a threat. "Okay, Mum. I have to sort out the orphanage packages first, then I'd be off to work." He placed a kiss on her cheeks before making his way out of the room and the house. He stepped out of the grand mansion into the crisp morning air. His driver, Jenkins, was already waiting for him by the car. "Good morning, sir." "Morning, Jenkins. Take me to the orphanage home, please." Charles nodded, settling into the back seat. As they drove through the city, he gazed out the window as his mind wandered to the meeting ahead. His mother had prepared quite a long speech, and he wasn't exactly looking forward to it, but he knew much better than to disobey her. The 20-minute drive ended up with them arriving at the orphanage home. It was a combination of 2 large apartments, surrounded by a small garden. A woman was already waiting outside with a smile on her face. He got out of the car and was immediately greeted by her warm smile. "Good morning, Sister Margaret." "Ah, Charles, dear boy. Thank you for coming. We're so grateful for your family's support." She took his hands for a quick shake. Charles smiled and followed her inside, where he was greeted by the chatter of children. He spent the next hour helping to sort packages of food and clothing that he had sent earlier that day, chatting with the kids and listening to their stories. "Sir, your mother." Jenkins moved closer to Charles, who was reading a book to the children, and gave him his phone. Charles jumped to his feet, realizing that if he didn't leave now, he'd be late for the meeting he was supposed to attend. As he prepared to leave, Sister Margaret approached him with a small box. "For your mother, Charles. A little something from the children." He took the box, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, sister. I'll make sure to give it to her." With a final wave to everyone, he rushed back to the car and Jenkins sped out of the orphanage, knowing that he had to beat time. As Charles arrived at the office, he took a deep breath and headed to the conference room where the meeting was being held. His secretary was already waiting for him with the speech that was prepared for him. He fumbled with the papers in his hand, trying to scan through the papers. "Good morning, everyone," he began, trying to sound confident as he entered the conference room. "I'm here today to talk about, Green Tech Inc. Yes. Our solar panels, harness the power of the sun and, reduce carbon emissions by, 50%. He paused, trying to remember the exact figure. He glanced down at his notes, but his eyes scanned the page without focusing. "Ah, yes. And our wind turbines. Generate electricity at a rate of, 2.5 megawatts? The clients looked at each other, seemingly unimpressed. One of them raised an eyebrow and another scribbled some notes on her pad. Charles tried to recover, but his words only got more jumbled. And, our energy storage systems, use advanced battery technology to, optimize energy efficiency and, reduce waste. He trailed off, struggling to remember the key points he wanted to make. The clients looked at each other, their expressions growing increasingly skeptical. He closed his eyes for a second, trying to get himself. The room fell silent, and Charles could feel the eyes of the executives, and most importantly, his mother on him. He knew he was struggling, but he couldn't seem to get his bearings. "Let me start again," he said, taking a deep breath. "I'm sorry, I'll just get to it." He took a deep breath, avoiding his mother's eyes. He had a bad feeling from the start about using something written by his mother, and despite him practicing everything, he wasn't still at ease. "Look, I know we're not just selling solar panels and wind turbines. We're selling a chance to make a difference. A chance to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and create a more sustainable future. At Green Tech Inc., we believe that our responsibility goes beyond just providing sustainable energy solutions. We're committed to making a positive impact in the communities we serve." Pointing to the screen behind him, he pointed to a table of contents. The Green Schools program has provided educational resources and workshops to teach children about renewable energy and sustainability. We've also partnered with local organisations to develop community gardens and green spaces, providing access to fresh produce and promoting environmental stewardship, he added. "And we're committed to transparency and accountability in everything we do," Charles emphasised. "We publish annual sustainability reports detailing our progress and impact. We also have an independent advisory board that ensures our practices align with our values and mission." Charles paused, scanning the room to make eye contact with the clients. "We believe that business can be a force for good, and we're dedicated to leading by example." The clients listened intently as their expressions changing from skepticism to interest. "I believe in what we do," Charles smiled, making his conviction known. "And I know that together we can make a real difference." The room fell silent for a moment before erupting into applause. The clients smiled, nodding their heads in approval. "Thank you, Charles," one of them finally spoke, looking at his partners for approval. "That was a great pitch. We can see that you're passionate about what your company does." Another executive spoke up. "I have to say, I was skeptical at first, but you've really sold me on your company's values. Can you tell me more about what you do?" Charles smiled, relieved that the pitch had gone well. "Of course. Our company, Green Tech Inc., specializes in sustainable energy solutions. We design and implement renewable energy systems for businesses and homes, helping them reduce their carbon footprint and save on energy costs." One of the executives asked, "That sounds impressive. Can you give us some examples of your work?" He nodded. "We've worked with several major companies to install solar panels and wind turbines, reducing their energy costs by up to 50%. We've also helped homeowners switch to renewable energy sources, reducing their reliance on fossil fuels." The executives nodded, taking notes and asking follow-up questions. After a few minutes of Q&A, one of them said, "Thank you. I guess we have found ourselves a partner." Charles excused himself from the meeting room, feeling relieved that the pitch had gone well. As he entered his office, he was followed closely by his mother, who looked less than pleased. "Charles, what was that?" she demanded, closing the door behind her. "You didn't follow the plan at all." He looked at his mother, trying to look calm. "Mum, I know I didn't stick to the script, but I felt like I needed to speak from the heart, and—" But his mother cut him off. "Speak from the heart? This is business, Charles, not some feel-good charity event. You need to stick to the plan and make a strong impression." "But Mum, I think I made a good impression. The clients seemed to respond well to my passion and—" Passion? This isn't about passion, Charles. It's about making deals and growing the company. You need to focus on the bottom line, not your feelings. She interrupted him again, pacing this time. Without a word, he walked past his mother, opening the door. I need some air. Charles, what are you doing? You can't just leave in the middle of the day. His mother began to protest, but he was already determined not to stay another minute with her. As he emerged from the building, Jenkins, his driver, was waiting by the car, looking somewhat concerned. Sir, shall I drive you somewhere? He asked, but Charles shook his head. No, Jenkins, I need some time alone. I'll drive myself. I'll be fine, Jenkins. Really. Despite his assurance, he saw that Jenkins was having none of it. Not that he could do anything. Charles got into his car and drove away from the building, wanting to be far away from everything. He drove aimlessly, trying to clear his head, until he found himself in a quiet neighborhood that looked pretty posh. He parked his car in a safe spot and got out, wandering around the streets, trying to process his emotions. Charles's feet carried him to a small restaurant tucked away between skyscrapers. The exterior was unremarkable, but something about it beckoned him inside. He pushed open the door, and a bell above it rang out, shattering the silence. As he stepped in, his eyes adjusted slowly to the lighting, and he spotted a young woman wiping down tables with a white cloth. Her dark hair was tied back in a ponytail, and a warm smile played on her lips as she looked up and caught his eye. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Hi there! She dropped the white cloth on the table, breaking the spell. Welcome to... Well, we don't have a name yet, actually. She laughed, and Charles's heart skipped a beat. But we're getting there. We're not open yet. But you should come back in a week for our grand opening. As he turned to leave, Charles caught a glimpse of himself in the window reflection, a young man who felt that he wanted more. He took a deep breath, savouring the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the warmth of the restaurant. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. But if you don't mind, can I get you something to drink? We're still experimenting with our menu, but I can whip up something special. Charles turned around, nodding eagerly as he went ahead to take a seat at the counter, still watching her. Try this. She handed him a glass filled with a velvety liquid, not so long after. It's one of our signature drinks. We call it the Midnight Sky. As he took a sip, he wondered why she seemed like an enigma. His eyes widened in surprise as he took another sip. The flavours danced on his tongue, and he could only describe it as being between sweet and savoury. Goodness, this is really incredible. He smiled at her, finishing the remaining contents in the glass. The young woman's eyes crinkled at the corner. I'm glad you like it. I'm sorry. I know I'm not in the right place to ask, but what brought you here? The place clearly looks uninhabited, especially from outside. Charles hesitated, unsure of what exactly he was to say to someone he just met. It has just been a rough day for me. I know the day hasn't ended, but it is what it is. My mother is constantly on my neck. Well, aren't they all? She chuckled, putting her hands on the counter. What exactly did she do this time? My mother. She can't seem to let me be. She wants in on anything or whatever I'm doing, and she also does her best to make her decision, my eventual decision. Even when you are against it. He sighed, nodding slowly. Even when I don't want it. And all I want is for her to see that I'm a grown-up. Clearly she sees that, but she doesn't want to admit it yet. Maybe she doesn't just want to accept that you won't be her little boy anymore. I guess things like that can be super scary sometimes. Charles watched as her forehead shone with beads of sweat, gotten from how she was working, yet it didn't dim her beauty. I didn't get your name earlier. I'm Charles. No, she broke into a smile, immediately moving away from the counter. I'm Sophia. He checked his Swiss wristwatch all of a sudden, shocked at the amount of time that had passed. How come I've spent this much time here? Is it your beauty that kept me, or the drink? Sophia shot him a look, making him laugh. Don't patronize me, Charles. It's most likely the drink. Charles hesitated, not wanting the moment to end. Can I see you again? Sophia raised an eyebrow, giving him a funny look. I don't know, I'm pretty busy with the restaurant. She looked away from him. My birthday party is coming up and I'd love for you to be there. It would mean a lot to me. She laughed, as there was a hint of amusement in her voice. I don't know. I might be busy for a while. We're still getting everything off the ground here. Charles nodded understandingly. I get it. But regardless, we should exchange contacts. I'd love to stay in touch, he said, pulling out his phone. Okay, sure. But no promises, okay? No promises, I swear. I just want to make sure I can find you again, he smiled, feeling triumphant. I guess we would be seeing each other again. Bye. He made his way out of the restaurant quickly. It wasn't until a few weeks later before Charles's birthday before he even thought of mentioning Sophia to his mother. Charles, what are you thinking? A Prescott does not associate with service industry workers. She shot him a look at him, dropping her spoon. Charles shifted uncomfortably, knowing he had displeased his mother. Mum, I just met her and... It doesn't matter. You must maintain a certain social standing, Charles. She scoffed, shaking her head. You don't expect me to accept you dating a waitress. What would that portray for the company? He sighed dramatically as the food was suddenly tasteless in his mouth. Please, Mum, can you just give her a chance? She looks nothing like what you think. Victoria stared at her golden boy, the only son that she had, and smiled. I've arranged a dinner for this weekend, and it was just supposed to be both of us. Now that you're telling me this, What's her name? Sophia. Thank you, Mum. She'd be here. He rose to his feet, excited that his mother had a change of heart. I'd get going now. I have to make a trip tomorrow. He was barely out of his mother's mansion when he texted Sophia about the dinner. He wanted to call her, but she had reprimanded him countless times about him calling when she was working. Sophia, on the other hand, got his text while she was working. It wasn't what she had planned to do that weekend, but it didn't hurt to go. Weekend came by quickly, and Sophia arrived at the estate and was taken aback by the grandeur of the gated entrance. As she stepped out of the cab, she was struck by the opulent decor. A wave of shock and embarrassment washed over her as she took a look at her clothes. As she stepped inside, she was struck by the opulent decor and finely tailored staff. Charles, why didn't you warn me? She whispered to Charles, who was waiting outside for her. I feel so out of place. Charles looked taken aback by her reaction. I'm sorry, Sophia. You look beautiful regardless. Don't flatter me. I'm telling you for the last time. She hit him playfully on the arm. You never told me you lived in another world. Isn't that rather too much of a flatter now? He leaned into her, smiling. I'm glad I didn't tell you now. You wouldn't have accepted to even give me your number. Sophia was about to retort back when she heard someone clap. Looking at the direction of the clap, she saw a gorgeous woman wrapped in a long black gown. I'd have left you two outside, but dinner is about to start. Sophia, darling, come. Sophia exchanged a look with a smiling Charles, who nudged her to his mother's direction. That's my mother, Victoria Prescott. Sophia and Victoria walked into the mansion together, and Sophia tried her best not to drop her jaw in awe of how beautiful everywhere looked. As they got to the dining room, which in Sophia's opinion was bigger than the restaurant altogether, all the maids were lined up at the ends of the room. Charles put out a chair for her, making her smile as she sat down. He sat down by her side just opposite his mother, who couldn't stop looking at them. As they were about to start eating, Charles's phone rang and he picked it. I'm sorry, but there's something I need to take care of now. I'd be back before you know it. He squeezed Sophia's hand softly before leaving the table. Well, dinner has to go on. He'd come join us soon, so eat. Victoria gestured to Sophia, who started to eat. Tell me, Rose, what inspired your ... interesting choice of attire? Sophia looked up, smiling. It's Sophia, Mum. I just thought it was a nice dress, I guess. Victoria smiled sweetly. Well, it's certainly eye-catching. And your profession? Tell me, what's it like being a waitress? It's a lot of experience, Ma'am. I get to interact with different people every single day, and it's fun in my books. Sometimes the restaurant has rush hours, which means everyone has to be up and doing. You talk of it as it's a good thing. Sophia's eyes went eastward as she thought to herself, to me, it's better than doing nothing. Speaking of which, Charles's birthday ball is going to be the event of the season. The guest list is a veritable who's who of society, rivaling even the Grammys. I dare say it will be a night to remember. Why, we have royalty, celebrities, and business moguls all attending. It's going to be a night of glamour and sophistication unlike anything you've ever experienced, I'm sure. Victoria paused, taking a sip of her wine, savouring the moment. And the venue? Oh, it's going to be breathtaking. We've rented out the entire estate, and the decorations are going to be exquisite. I've spared no expense in making sure this is a night to remember. After all, Charles deserves only the best. Sophia's eyes widened slightly at the mention of the high-profile event. She couldn't help but feel a twinge of hesitation about attending. Victoria's bragging had made her feel even more out of place. Oh, I'm sure it will be, Sophia replied, trying to sound nonchalant despite her growing doubts. As the evening drew to a close, Charles walked Sophia out, thanking her for coming. I'm sorry if my mother was a bit much, he whispered, holding her hands. Sophia smiled weakly. I had a good time. The only thing missing was you. You were gone for almost all through dinner time. I'm sorry. I'm really, really sorry. He brought her in for a hug. The next day, Sophia received the dress along with a note from Victoria. Dear Sophia, I thought this dress would be perfect for Charles's birthday ball. Black tie events can be so intimidating, I wanted to help. Best, Victoria. Sophia touched the hem of the fabric, seeing that it looked expensive enough. What gladdened her heart more was the kind gesture from his mother. After yesterday's dinner, she was slightly convinced that Victoria didn't really like her, but this just showed that it wasn't the case. After she had settled down in her apartment after dinner, she rummaged her wardrobe looking for something nice to wear to his birthday. Nothing would make her repeat the mistake she made earlier with not dressing well. But she didn't have to do that again. She had something unique to wear. On the day of the event, she wore the elegant black dress that was clearly made out of a luxurious fabric that hugged her curves in all the right places. The dress fell just above her knees and had a nice neckline that didn't show much of her collarbone. She paired the dress with a pair of silver heels that added a few inches to her height. The shoes were a gift from Charles, who sent them alongside jewellery when she told him that his mother sent her a dress. She was glad that they were comfortable enough to wear for a few hours. Her outfit was completed with the simple necklace and a pair of stud earrings that he got for her. She kept her hair simple, pulling it back into a low ponytail. As she looked in the mirror, she felt confident and beautiful. All she had to do now was to hurry out and get into the car that Charles readied for her. Sophia arrived at the mansion and she was amazed by how beautifully decorated it was. As she reached the door, she was greeted by a team of security guards and event staff who were checking the invitations and IDs of the guests. Sophia approached them confidently, expecting to be let in without any issues. Good evening. Welcome to the event, one of the staff members greeted, eyeing her up and down. May I see your invitation, please? She hesitated, realizing she didn't have an invitation. I'm a guest of Charles, she said. He invited me personally. The staff member raised an eyebrow. I apologize, but I need to see your invitation or confirmation email to let you in. Just then, a woman with an iPad and a stern expression approached them. I'm the event coordinator, she introduced herself and lifted the iPad to fit on Sophia's face. I'm afraid this woman isn't on the guest list. The event coordinator turned to Sophia. I'm sorry, but you're not allowed inside. You'll have to leave. Sophia stepped away from the entrance and pulled out her phone. She dialed Charles's number, hoping he would answer, and clear up the misunderstanding. But the phone rang and rang with no answer. Sophia tried again, thinking maybe he was busy or didn't hear it. But again, there was no answer. She sent him a text message, trying to keep her emotions in check. "Hey, it's Sophia. I'm outside. They won't let me in. What's going on?" But there was no response. Sophia felt a surge of worry and frustration. Why wasn't Charles answering her calls or messages? Charles Citrus's eyes scanned the room, searching for Sophia, who informed him earlier that she was on her way. But as the minutes went by, he could help but feel a bit distracted. If she had arrived, she would have come to say hi to him. Where was she? He assumed she was simply mingling with the guests, but as he made his way through the crowds, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Finally, he checked his phone and saw the missed calls from Sophia. His heart sank as he quickly dialed her number. "Sophia, where are you?" he asked, alarmed at the number of missed calls. "I'm outside," she answered sadly. "I wasn't allowed in. My name wasn't on the list." Charles's face fell as he realized the mistake. He quickly apologized and made his way to the entrance, where he found Sophia looking stunning in the dress his mother had sent her. But as he escorted her into the celebration, he couldn't help but notice the curious glances from the other guests. "I'm so sorry. There must have been some kind of mix-up. Forgive me, please." Sophia glared at him for a while before walking over to where the champagne was and grabbed a cup for herself. "For a moment, I contemplated going home and forgetting about everything. Thank your stars that you came on time." "Thank you for not leaving." He was about to say more when a man approached them, informing Charles that his attention was needed. "I'm sorry, I'd be back in a jiffy. Just have fun." And with that, he was out of her sight. At first, she tried to make the best of the night, but as the night wore on, she began to realize that something was off. People were looking at her strangely, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "Excuse me, can you refill my drink?" Someone tapped her from behind. "The others seem all busy. Please be quick." Sophia glanced behind her shoulder, unsure if she was the one the lady was talking to. "I'm sorry, but you are mistaken. I'm not a maid." The woman laughed. "Are you being serious?" It was then that Sophia realized that the dress she was wearing was identical to the uniforms of the house staff. She was being mistaken for a mere servant, and the guests were finding it hilarious. "I'm not a maid," she repeated again, much more to herself and not the woman. "I'm a guest." But the woman looked at her scornfully and scoffed. "Oh, sorry, I must have mistaken you for one of the help." Sophia felt embarrassed and furious at the same time. She knew she had to find Charles and get out of there as soon as possible. Sophia glanced around the place looking for the restroom. She needed to avoid the mocking glances before they would get to her. Luckily, there was no one in the restroom at that time. She got into one of the stalls and locked the door, wanting to be alone. She heard the door open, and loud voices filled the whole restroom. "Can you believe that dress?" One of them put on the tap, giggling. "It's like she's trying to be a servant or something." "I know, right?" the other woman replied, laughing. "I saw her trying to mingle with the guests, and I was like, girl, you're not fooling anyone." Sophia felt a sting of embarrassment and shame. She couldn't believe that she had been so blind to Victoria's plan. She had thought that the dress was a kind gesture, but now she realized it was just a cruel trick. She quickly left the bathroom as soon as the girls left, trying to hold back tears. She couldn't take this anymore. She needed to find Charles and tell him what was happening. But as she made her way back to the party, she saw Charles laughing and chatting with his friends, completely oblivious to her distress. She felt a surge of anger and hurt. Why was he so clueless? Didn't he care that his mother was humiliating her like this? She took a deep breath and tried to calm down. She needed to talk to Charles, to make him understand what was happening. But as she approached him, she saw Victoria walking up to her, spreading her arms out. "I hope you know where you belong now." Victoria whispered into her ears before Sophia could pull away from the hug. And in that moment, she knew that she had to get out of there before things got any worse. As Sophia turned to leave, a guest intentionally poured their drink on her. "Ha! Look at the help now. Why don't you go clean it?" "That's it. I've had enough." She closed her eyes, trying to hold back tears. She pushed through the crowd that was beginning to form, desperate to escape, but was met with a wall of paparazzi. "Who are you?" one of them asked, camera snapping. Sophia tried to shield her face. "I'm no one. Just leave me alone." However, they continued to snap photos of her. Charles, on the other hand, was discussing with a potential client about the company when he heard gasps. Looking in that direction, he sighted Sophia. "Excuse me," Charles interrupted the man he was talking to and began to walk towards where he saw her last. He saw her moving towards the entrance with her clothes stained and paparazzi all over her. But as he reached the entrance, he saw Sophia stepping into a taxi. "Sophia, wait!" he called out, but the taxi door closed behind her and the car pulled away. He had to make things right. He pulled out his phone and dialed her number, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried again and again, but she wasn't answering. He knew he had to talk to her, to explain what had happened and apologize for his mother's mistake. But for now, she was gone, and Charles was left standing alone outside his own party, feeling helpless and ashamed. Weeks passed, and Charles's distraction at work grew worse by the day. His mother, Victoria, noticed the change in him and confronted him. "Charles, what's going on with you? You're not focused on the company at all. We can't afford to lose our edge. Not now when we're on the verge of being taken over." Charles sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know, Mother. I'll try to focus." But he couldn't shake Sophia off his mind. He tried to immerse himself in work, but his thoughts kept drifting back to her. He wondered if she was okay, if she had forgiven him. As the days turned into weeks, Charles found himself becoming increasingly withdrawn. He stopped attending meetings, stopped answering calls, and stopped leaving his office. His mother grew concerned, but Charles couldn't explain what was wrong. He didn't know himself. One evening, he found himself standing in front of the restaurant where they first met, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. But she wasn't there. The next day, he drove to her house, hoping to see her. But she wasn't there either. Feeling desperate, Charles decided to wait for her outside her apartment. He arrived in the morning and sat in his car, watching the entrance. As the hours passed, he began to feel like he was hallucinating. But then he saw her. His heart skipped a beat. He wondered if he was dreaming, but Sophia saw him and smiled. "Charles, what are you doing here?" she asked, standing by the window side. He got out of the car, feeling like he was in a trance. I don't know. I just needed to see you." Sophia nodded. "Come inside." Charles followed her into the apartment, feeling like he was walking into a dream. The room was decorated with different hand-drawn characters. Sophia led him to the couch and they sat down together. "I've missed you," Charles started saying immediately. Sophia took his hand. "I've missed you too." They sat there in silence for a moment, hands entwined. Then Sophia spoke up. "I've been thinking a lot about us, Charles, about what happened at the party." Charles nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. "I'm so sorry, Sophia. I didn't know what happened until later when I heard someone poured wine all over you." Sophia squeezed his hand. "You didn't know, Charles. It got hard for me. I felt so alone and naked out there." "I'm sorry, Sophia. I should have known, and I shouldn't have left you alone. It's been hard waking up each morning and knowing that I can't reach you. It has been pure torture." She smiled, seeing the pain in his eyes, and understood that it was hard for him. "Let's go get dinner then. What's the best way to celebrate this?" Charles let out a shout, crushing into her and holding her like there was no tomorrow. "Thank you for forgiving me." "Thank you." She held him tight, and he continued to mutter his appreciation. It was until a while later, after she had freshened up, that they decided to eat out. As they stepped out of the apartment, hand in hand, Charles noticed a black limousine parked behind his car. His steps slowed down, alerting Sophia, who followed his gaze. "What is my mother doing here?" he mumbled to himself as Sophia held his hand tighter. Sophia's eyes widened as a chauffeur stepped out of the limo and approached them. "Miss Sophia, your grandfather requests your presence immediately." Charles's eyes narrowed at the man and he stood in front of Sophia like a form of barricade. "Who's your grandfather?" "I don't know what's going on, but I have to go." The chauffeur opened the door, waiting for Sophia to enter. "Please, Miss Sophia, your grandfather is waiting." Sophia turned to Charles. "Come with me?" "Of course. I wouldn't just follow some random person." As they entered the limo, Sophia's anxiety grew. "I've never seen my grandfather send a limo before. Something must be wrong. I hope he is all right. The last time he wasn't well, he didn't tell me. I just hope he's all right." Charles took her hand, trying to reassure her. "We'll face whatever it is together." The limo pulled up to a large commercial building, the Green Tech Inc. Company logo emblazoned on the side. "Wait, why are we here? This is your family's company, right?" Sophia asked as they got out. Charles was trying to understand why they were here. As they glanced back at the chauffeur, he gestured that they should go in. They got into the building hurriedly. As they stepped out of the elevator, Charles and Sophia heard someone speaking in one of the offices. Charles knew where exactly it was and they both got there, still confused. A man who had his back to them was addressing the people in the room on how things would be run differently. Someone in the room must have hinted the man because he turned towards them, smiling. "Ah, there she is, your new CEO has arrived," he informed the room and they erupted into an applause. "Grandad." Sophia stepped forward, relieved to see that he was fine but confused by his statement. Sophia's grandfather chuckled. "Yes, my dear. I'm afraid I've kept my true identity and wealth hidden from you, but I've been grooming you for leadership all along." Charles's mind reeled as he tried to process the information. Sophia, the woman he loved, was now the CEO of Green Tech Inc. His mother had told him about some issues concerning the next person to lead, but he wasn't in his right mind. Sophia's grandfather continued, "I've had you working at one of my restaurants, with my security monitoring your progress. You've shown great potential, my darling. And now, it's time for you to take the reins." Victoria's face turned pale, her eyes darting between Sophia and Charles. "This can't be," she whispered. George's expression turned stern as he pulled Victoria into the office with Charles and Sophia. "I know what happened at the birthday party, Victoria. Treating my beloved granddaughter like that was unforgivable." Victoria's eyes darted between George, Charles and Sophia as she felt colour drain from her face. I can explain." Sophia's grandfather George cut her off. "No, you can't. My initial intention was to sell the company off in pieces, leaving you and your son with scraps after paying off the board. But seeing how much my granddaughter loves Charles, and how much he loves her, and being he wasn't a part of the scheme, I've changed my mind." Charles's eyes widened in shock. "What do you mean, what happened at the party?" Sophia took a deep breath. Her plan was to tell him at a better time. "Your mother humiliated me, Charles. She made me wear a uniform identical to the staff, and people thought I was a servant. That's why that lady poured wine over me." "Mum, is that right? Are they actually saying the truth? Why would you do such a thing to her?" He moved closer to his mother, who was avoiding his eyes. It was then it hit him. He remembered when people shot them looks when she arrived at the event. It was why his mother didn't want him out of her sight after the incident on his birthday. This would be the last time we'd have a conversation. I never thought that you'd go as far as treating her poorly. You should have been better than this." George nodded. "I'm glad to see you're not like your mother, Charles, but I want to hear from you. Can you tell me why you should still be a part of this company?" Charles took a deep breath. "I've worked hard for this company, sir. I've given 110%, always trying to turn things around. I love this company, and I believe in its potential. I want to continue working here to make it succeed. I'm sorry about my mother's wrong. I can assure you that I'm nothing like her." George looked at him, impressed. I like your spirit, Charles, but it's not up to me anymore. Ask the new CEO. No, I don't think you should be an employee here. Charles nodded at their decision. He understood how things might turn out at the end. Because I think you would be better at running it. Charles thought he wasn't hearing well, but the smile on her face made him know that he heard right. Are you serious? Do you mean it? Yes, I do. You've proven yourself, Charles. You have the heart and the skills to lead this company to greatness. Charles drew her in for a hug as he inhaled the fragrance around her. Thank you, my love. In the corner of the room, Victoria watched as her son and the girl that she thought has been taken care of laugh and hug each other. It was more humiliating that her son wasn't even paying attention to her. It was like she didn't exist. She stood there till George invited them for a quick dinner celebration. It was then she crumbled, falling to her knees as tears streamed down her face, and she couldn't help but wish that she could turn back the hands of time. She expected a lot of things, but she didn't expect that it would turn out so bad for her. She started to notice it when she went to her favourite social club for lunch. The maitre d' looked at her coldly, and the usual table by the window was given to someone else. I'm afraid we're fully booked today, Mrs. Prescott. Victoria was shocked. She had always been treated like royalty at this club. As she left the club, she saw her friends whispering and pointing at her. They quickly looked away, avoiding eye contact. Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. She tried to shake off the feeling, telling herself it was just her imagination. But as the days went by, things only got worse. She was no longer invited to exclusive events, and her phone calls were no longer returned. Her bank account began to dwindle, and she realised that her money couldn't take her anywhere. Victoria's world was crumbling around her. She had lost everything, her reputation, her friends, her status, and it was all because of her own cruel actions. She tried to reach out to her son, Charles, but he refused to take her calls. He had disowned her just like everyone else, and that hurt the most. Only if she had been more sensible and matured, she wouldn't have been in the mess that she had found herself in. She didn't think that one day, everything she once had wouldn't be hers anymore. As Sophia pushed her baby stroller through the quiet street in the neighbourhood, she couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment. Her life had taken a dramatic turn since meeting Charles, and she was grateful for every moment they spent together. Their daughter, Esmeralda, was the light of their lives, and she couldn't imagine a future without her. She breathed in deeply, taking in the sweet scent of blooming flowers and freshly baked bread wafting from the nearby cafes. She thought about her life and all the good things that had happened since meeting Charles. She remembered the way he had looked at her on their first date and the picnic they had. It was weeks after he had commenced work as the CEO of the company. She remembered the way he had held her hand while teaching her how to ride a bicycle. She thought about their wedding day. That day came by so quickly, but she wasn't nervous at all. She had what she thought that she couldn't have at one point in her life. Her grandfather, always loving and doting, did everything to make the day splendid for her. She couldn't have wished for anything more. And then, of course, there was Esmeralda, their beautiful daughter. Sophia's heart swelled with love as she thought about her little girl. As she rolled the stroller, Sophia felt grateful for this life she had built. She thought about the way Charles supported her, encouraged her, and loved her for who she was. She thought about the way Esmeralda brought them joy and laughter every day. Sophia's heart was full as she walked, the stroller gliding smoothly over the sidewalk. She felt like the luckiest person in the world, and she knew that she would never take this life, this love, for granted. As she turned a corner, she sighted someone looking so familiar. At first, she thought it was just her eyes, but as she moved closer, she knew she wasn't seeing things. Victoria? The woman turned around, holding the hands of the children with her on each hand. As she saw that it was Sophia, she gasped and her eyes were immediately filled with tears. Sophia, how are you? Sophia smiled as she took in the sight of her mother-in-law. She seemed to have lost all the vibrancy she had years ago. Her once smooth skin now had gained wrinkles all over. "I'm doing fine. Who are these beauties with you?" She gestured to the little girls that Victoria was holding. "Hi, darlings. How are you?" The children, who were busy staring at the nearby park, were oblivious to Sophia's greeting. "I'm sorry, Sophia," Victoria apologized out of the blue. "It's all right, Victoria. I don't have anything against you whatsoever. I'm sorry about everything that happened to you." Victoria's eyes welled up with tears. "I was so blind, Sophia. I thought money and status were everything, but I've learned my lesson. Being nice to people is what truly matters. I'm glad you've learned that, and I want to offer you something. The company. It's yours if you want it." Victoria shook her head. "No, Sophia, I don't want it. I've realized that money isn't everything. I'm just grateful to have experienced the change. I know this is quite late, but this is my daughter, Esmeralda Victoria Prescott. Charles and I have gotten married and had a beautiful child." Sophia removed the cloth she used to cover Esmeralda's body and gestured for Victoria to see. "Esmeralda Victoria?" she repeated, her voice trembling with emotion. Sophia nodded, smiling. "Yes, that way we could remember you." Victoria felt a wave of emotion wash over her. No one had ever named a child after her before. She had always been the one who had hurt people, who had caused pain and suffering. But now, this little girl, this beautiful, innocent child, carried her name. Tears sprang to Victoria's eyes as she gazed at Esmeralda. She felt a sense of pride and joy that she had never felt before. She reached out a trembling hand and gently touched Esmeralda's cheek. "Oh, my dear," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "I am so honored. I don't deserve it, but I am so grateful." "Yig." Sophia smiled and hugged Victoria tightly. "You deserve it, Victoria. You deserve all the love and joy in the world." As Victoria held Esmeralda in her arms, she felt a sense of redemption wash over her. She knew that she had been given a second chance, a chance to make things right, to be a good grandmother to this little girl, to be a good person. "We want to go to the park. We want to go to the park." The little girls that she was holding chimed in unison. Victoria smiled and nodded. "Not today, kids, but I promise we'll have fun anyway, sis." Sophia shot her a curious glance. "These little ones are from the orphanage home where I volunteer. I'm helping take care of them today. They don't have families, so I like to spend time with them and make them feel loved." "Oh, Victoria, that's amazing. I had no idea you were involved with an orphanage. How did you get started with that?" "I realized that I had been given a second chance, and I wanted to use that to make a difference in the lives of others. These children deserve love and care, and I'm happy to be able to provide that for them. You know, I've been thinking. Despite our past differences, I'd like to extend an olive branch. Would you like to come over to the house for dinner sometime?" Victoria was taken aback by the invitation. She hadn't expected Sophia to reach out to her, especially after everything that had happened. I don't know, Sophia," Victoria said hesitantly. "I'm not sure that's a good idea." Sophia nodded understandingly. "I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but I think it's time for us to put the past behind us. We're family after all. And I'd like to get to know you better, and I'm sure it's time for Charles and you to come back together." Victoria was touched by Sophia's words. She had never expected her estranged daughter-in-law to reach out to her like this, especially when she was the one who treated her badly. "Okay," Victoria finally nodded. "I'll come over for dinner, but just me, not the kids from the orphanage." Sophia smiled. "Of course, just you. I'll make sure to cook something special." Victoria stood outside Sophia's house, taking a deep breath before ringing the doorbell. She hadn't seen her son, Charles, in years, and she wasn't sure what to expect. The door opened, and Sophia smiled warmly. "Victoria, come on in." Victoria stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Charles. He looked older, more mature, but his eyes still held a hint of the pain she had caused him. "Charles," she called out, not moving from the spot she was in. "Mother!" Victoria took a step forward, her hands extended. "Charles, I don't know where to start. I'm so sorry for everything I did. I was wrong to treat you the way I did." Charles looked at her warily, but Sophia stepped forward, placing a hand on his arm. "Charles, please, hear her out." He nodded, and Victoria continued. "I know I can never undo the pain I caused you, but I want you to know that I love you. I always have. And I'm proud of the man you've become." He looked at her, his eyes searching for sincerity. What she had done a lot that hurt him. Things that took him time to get over, but now she was here. And then slowly he nodded. "I love you too, Mother." Victoria felt a lump form in her throat as Charles opened his arms, and she stepped into them, holding him tightly. The world seemed to stand still at that point, like they were the only one there. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. She didn't bother to wipe the tears from her face. Charles held her, his own eyes wet with tears. "I forgive you, Mother. I forgive you." As they hugged, Sophia smiled, feeling peaceful. This was what she had wanted for so long, for Charles and Victoria to reconcile. After a few moments, Charles stepped back, smiling. "Let's go sit down, we have a lot to catch up on." Victoria nodded, smiling, and the three of them sat down in the living room, talking and laughing together like it was supposed to be. As the evening wore on, Victoria felt a sense of joy she hadn't felt in years. She had her son back, and she was grateful for it. Charles held his wife's hands as they shared a glance. Of all things that he was blessed with in life, she was the most amazing of all. "Thank you," he mouthed to her, making her to smile like a high school girl that just fell in love.